prior to having you on, Eddie, we were talking about a couple of Clydesdales rolling into the NHL and the NBA. Obviously, Bedard in a city with a team you're familiar with. You got Victor Wembanyama down in San Antonio. Like, these are two of the most hyped prospects we can recall in a long, long time. And, I'm curious, how you feel about the ability for these teams to protect those guys, because there's a reason they're in Chicago and San Antonio, respectively. It's because those teams have not been any good, and they're not expected to turn it around right away. The Blackhawks threw some pretty big money at Nick Foligno, who's a great guy, great leader. Big money at Corey Perry, the same thing applies. Doesn't seem to be that veteran presence that sticks out in San Antonio. But, how important do you think it is, forget what these talents are all about, wins and losses, having vets in the room to just kind of protect these two guys?
Well, it's huge, Bryan. To me, I think Nick Foligno was one of the best free agent signings by any team this year. And look, did they overpay him? Yes. I mean, but they had cap room, and they need to get to the floor. And when you're going to bring in a guy like that, that's been around the block, and to be able to keep everybody honest and to help mentor a guy like Connor Bedard, that is so important. Look, I lived it in Pittsburgh. I was coaching in Pittsburgh when we were lucky enough to win the lottery over Anaheim, by the way. How about Anaheim? Think about Anaheim back, how many years ago now is that? Is that 18 years ago?
Yeah, 18.
Where it's Anaheim and Pittsburgh. I'm coaching in Pittsburgh, and we win the lottery. We get Crosby. And then fast forward all these years later, and it's Anaheim and Chicago. And Chicago gets Bedard, and
Wild.
and I think that Philly's a pretty. I'm sorry. I think obviously Carlson and Fantilli, but you have two players that are coming in, and Anaheim's right there, and they lose both of those. However you want to call it, they lose both of them, and they don't get either one of those guys. So. I lived it in Pittsburgh when we got Sid, and it was so important to make sure that you have the right agenda-led veteran guys. And a guy like Nick Foligno, I think, to me, is absolutely perfect for a guy like Connor Bedard. We had a couple of guys in Pittsburgh that were right. We had a couple of guys that were on self-led agendas and made life really difficult. And that needed to be addressed, and it was addressed. And, eventually I ended up getting fired a couple of months later, but that's neither here nor there. You need to make sure that you are having the right guys, to your point, Bryan, about having veteran guys in there to show the player not only on the ice and in practice and in games, but also, how you carry yourself and just, again, to have somebody to lean on and somebody that's been around. I never played with Nick's dad. I never played with Mike. I played against him, obviously, many, many years. But, Marcus and Nick Foligno are two guys. They're two of my favorite guys that I get to cover, on a nightly basis in the National Hockey League. So it's an important step, but again, you gotta have good players around to be able to play in this league, and they've certainly started on the right foot here by winning the lottery and getting a guy like Bedard. And unfortunately for the Blackhawks, you guys might want to take 5 minutes and take a look at their schedule to start the season. But I'm going to just tell you, it's a Stanley Cup schedule. When you look at it, because their first 5 games are on the road. They open up in Pittsburgh and in Boston. I think they're in. I want to say that they're in Montreal and Toronto.
They are.
Trip.
That's right.
I think they're in very, very early, and then I think they end in Colorado.
Yeah.
But if you look at their first 15 games of the season, you'd sit there and go, "Oh man!" You're finding that emoji on the thing with the hand over the face for about 10 minutes, sitting there going but that's where you're really going to need, and obviously knowing Luke Richardson as well as I do. They're gonna protect Connor Bedard, and it's going to be some time, and it's been some lean years here recently, but they've got a kid that obviously has the potential to turn this thing around, but it's not going to happen obviously in 5 games or 15 games. It's going to take some time because you got some holes. But I love the signing of Nick Foligno. I think that was just it was needed by Kyle Davidson and the Blackhawks to bring in a guy like that can really help Connor Bedard, not only this year, but for his years long after Nick hangs up the skates.